Rob and Olivia, I'll wait for you folks to let us know. You can proceed. Okay, thank you, Rob. We are back in open session. I'll make a declaration that we discussed only the items subject to solicitor and client privilege and nothing else. Okay, so we're back and the main item, we're still dealing with this item. Is there any further debate or questions before I call the question on the motion? Seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion before us? Is there anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. Scott, thank you. Just one quick second. The next one is probably going to be. Thank you for your indulgence. I think we're going to break for lunch. I'm advised that lunch is now ready. So we'll adjourn. How long do we need, council, so that Scott has a sense of when we'll be coming back? It's now 12:36. If we said 1:15, is that sufficient? Yes, I see a few nods. Okay, then we'll adjourn and we'll come back at 1:15, Scott. Thank you. Thank you very much. Calls back together. Hope everyone had a good lunch. Scott, good to see you. All right. We are now on to item 7B. I see Scott in place. Our official plan amendment 11. I'm looking for a mover to put this item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Woodbury. Scott, you have the floor.
Sorry. Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Warden. So what we have before us is a what we're calling a housekeeping amendment to the county official plan. And just by way of some background, the current county official plan, Recolor Gray, was approved in June of 2019 by the province. Later that year and into 2020, we undertook our first housekeeping matter and our first housekeeping amendment, and that was to address some minor changes to the plan that were missed in the creation of the plan. And that's quite normal after an official plan is adopted. Throughout later 2020 and into 2021, the county worked with Hempson on a growth management strategy, an update to our growth management strategy. That document came before County Council in July of 2021. And at that time, there was a staff report which directed staff to prepare an amendment to implement the new growth numbers from the growth management strategy, as well as to further address some housekeeping matters. So the purpose of this report and this presentation really is to illustrate to council what housekeeping matters are being considered. Although the growth management piece is a part of this, those numbers haven't changed, and council was privy to those numbers in July of 2021, and those documents have been posted on our website. And we have had numerous requests from various public bodies and agencies that have started to use those numbers to look at their own needs as they move forward. And so official plan amendment number 11 is proposing to change the horizon of our county official plan from the current year 2038, which was supposed to be the end date, until 2046, which represents the new 25-year planning horizon that we're allowed to plan for through the 2020 provincial policy statement. We also have a number of text and mapping changes, a few of which I'll just go through very briefly for you here now. With respect to the text changes in the plan, first and foremost, we are replacing tables 1 to 4, which are the population, residential, and employment growth numbers. So those will be using the new numbers. We are clarifying some density policies in our primary settlement areas across the county in terms of how municipalities may choose to implement those density policies as they go through their own municipal official plan updates in that regard. We are also, and you'll see this in the maps coming up, we're recognizing 2 future secondary plan areas that were identified through the Town of Hanover's comprehensive review process. We're making some changes to the second unit policy. So these would be your accessory apartments, whether they be a basement apartment or above a detached garage. There's been some rebranding at the provincial level. They're now called additional residential units. So we're making some changes there to clarify the policy and to implement some of the early direction from the county's Affordable Housing Task Force. We're also, in response to the presentation that was made both at County Council and at the Agricultural Advisory Committee, we're proposing some changes to the surplus farm dwelling severance policies with the goal of hoping to preserve more of those old barns across the county. We're clarifying some of the existing on-farm diversified use policies. So these are the policies that guide people when they're setting up a farm business. And we're also clarifying some of the policies around camping or what we're more appropriately calling it now, glamping facilities in that regard. Glamorous camping, I'm told that means. We're looking to implement some early direction from the county's climate change action plan, knowing, of course, that once the climate change action plan comes before council in its final form, there could be further changes that are needed at that point. We're clarifying some policies as they relate to development and potential crossings around the county's CP rail trail. We're clarifying some of the policies which relate to bedrock and shale resources across the county. Council may be more familiar with the aggregate resources that we've been dealing with for a number of years, but Recolor Gray for the first time implemented some bedrock and shale mapping. And so we've learned a few lessons already there. And so we're trying to clarify the policies. And we're adding some further definitions to the plan. And the one thing I neglected to mention at the very beginning of this presentation is I'm the one making the presentation today, but this really was a team effort. Stephanie and Becky and Carolyn and Randy and I all put in a lot of work on this, from the mapping to the policy direction to researching what others are doing. With respect to the maps, a number of the maps are being changed in about one of 5 categories. And so this first one is a sample map. This is just on the west end of Durham. And this is an instance where we're recognizing an existing industrial use. And there's not too many of these, but this is what I would call the former Interforce property just off Grey Road 4 west of Durham there. There's another one that never had any recognition in our county plan, which was the Chapman's Distribution Center on Highway 10. And so just to make sure if either of these facilities were to ever come in for changes, that they have some recognition of what's built and been there for a number of years. Some of the other changes are being made to the inland lakes and shoreline designation. That's what you see in teal there, whereby there were some inland lakes and shoreline areas that were inadvertently missed in the mapping in the recolor gray official plan and ended up in the rural or agricultural designation. As you can see, even just looking at the lot fabric there and the road network, these clearly aren't agricultural parcels. They're homes and cottages. So we're just recognizing what's already there, not necessarily expanding it for new growth opportunities. This is the aforementioned changes in West Grey, adjacent to the town of Hanover, with respect to two of the future development areas that they've identified through their comprehensive review process. Another change that we've looked at making is recognizing existing rural plans of subdivision in our aggregate mapping. So these are subdivisions that were approved many years ago, and in the current version of the plan are still showing that copper color on top of the residential lots. And the copper color there is to represent our high quality sand and gravel resources. And we're simply recognizing through these changes that if someone came in for a minor variance on one of these lots for their existing home, they're not going to have to meet the tests of showing why we can't extract aggregate there. And the reason is obvious, because they're already built upon. With respect to some of the other changes, we are recognizing existing approved pits and quarries. So a number of members of council may remember this particular one shown in purple there. This is the Bumstead Pit in Chatsworth. That was approved by the local planning appeal tribunal. And so we're now formally recognizing it in the plan, simply what was approved. With respect to the shale and bedrock mapping, there were some instances where some of this mapping crept into the settlement areas. And what we thought we had done was sort of clipped out, if you can picture like a cookie cutter approach going into a dough, we'd clipped out our settlement areas from the bedrock and shale areas. But what had happened was where there was hazard lands going through the settlement area, that same cookie cutter didn't apply to the hazard land. So we ended up with these long fingers following waterways of bedrock and shale. And again, we're simply recognizing that our settlement areas are set aside for growth. We're not viewing these as future quarries or extractive operations in that regard. And that was the shale mapping, and this is the bedrock mapping, just showing those areas along the waterfront of Georgian Bay where we have existing residential development. Again, we're not looking at those as future extraction areas, but the areas further into the hinterland, if you will, would still be recognized. And so with respect to what we're presenting today, this is the first step, so to speak. This is to introduce it to council. If council were to support the staff recommendation today, what would happen is we would post the proposed text and mapping changes on our county website. We would then notify groups and agencies and the public as per the Planning Act. With an amendment of this magnitude, it's not necessarily individual letters sent in the mail to all landowners. It would be ads in the newspaper and making people aware through our website and social media. We would proceed to schedule a public meeting so the public could have their input in that regard. And of course, we would take any written comments as well. We've already got an existing meeting scheduled with our local municipal planners. And if the committee of the whole supports the recommendation today, that would certainly get added to that agenda on December the 10th. And then after all that public review and agency review, we'd have a look at what was being proposed and determine whether or not there's any further changes needed there. Maybe somebody has identified something that we've missed, or maybe somebody has identified some changes to the wording or mapping we proposed. And then we would wrap that all up and bring it in a final report with a policy analysis and staff recommendation back to the committee of the whole. And if they supported it, the bylaw would ultimately go on to county council for their consideration. So what's being recommended at this stage is that the report be received and that staff be directed to undertake the regular process under the Planning Act to garner feedback on official plan amendment number 11. So that's all I have at this time, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Scott. Are there any questions from council? Oh, Councillor Sweber, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Scott, are the local planners happy with these growth numbers, or I understand there might be some concern with some of them being a little on the low side?
Through you, Mr. Warden. So the local planners were involved in supplying data for the growth numbers. We had some, especially as we were working through that process, that raised concerns with the numbers that were being presented. We did end up having a finalized version of that study, and there's been the clear direction to county staff, and we've shared that back with local staff, is that these represent a snapshot in time, and we're going to have to continue to monitor it. And what we flagged is that the next major touch point, if you will, where we'll have to monitor this, will be following receipt of the results of the 2021 census. And so we anticipate a review of these growth numbers coming in 2023 once we have the full data sets in the census. So to get back to your question more directly, Councillor Sweber, I wouldn't say we've gotten a broad round of applause for the numbers, but I would say that there's a general acceptance that they're not too far off, and that things can change at any point in the future. We could head into a recession, or the current building boom could continue. So we're going to continue to monitor those.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Close only counts in hand grenades, and there's something else too, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, my question is regarding the notion of horseshoes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Of including the old bank barn in with the surplus farm dwelling. Is that going to be an option, or is that going to be that's the way it is?
Thank you, Councillor Milne, through you, Mr. Warden. That will be an option. And the reason it's not a mandated, that's the way it is because in some cases that old bank barn is a significant distance away from the dwelling that sought to be severed. And so the direction from the provincial policy is that we keep those lots as small as possible. So we're stretching the rules a little bit by including those barns, but we think that where they're within a reasonable distance of the house, it does make sense to have them with the surplus dwelling if they're still in good construction and decent shape in that regard. Ultimately, it will be a business decision of the farmer making the severance if they choose to keep that barn on the farm, or if they choose to tear the barn down or sell it with the house. But the new proposed policies, and these were shared in very draft form with the Agricultural Advisory Committee, would be that we could consider severing it with the house in some instances there.
I don't see anyone else. Going once, twice, gone. So I'll call the question now. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much, Scott. We're moving now to 7C, the Employee Assistance Program. Need a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Carlton, seconded by Councillor Desai. And Sandra, oh, there you are. You snuck up on me. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, members of County Council. At the October 14th session of the Committee of the Whole, Council directed staff to bring back a report with some information for the Employee Assistance Program, or the EAP program, offering it to members of County Council. So in the report, you'll see the history of how EAP came to be for the staff groups with Grey County. It is a well-received program providing short-term support to our members when they need some support or some advice in various ways. We know a lot of our employees are glad to have it for their children who are going off to college and university. It's a way for them to get help without having to necessarily reach out to mom and dad if they don't want to. So there's a lot of good things about this, the program that the county offers. And in this, you may know that County Council are in the Owners Pension Plan, and that's really the only benefit that councillors receive at the upper tier level. other than accidental death and dismemberment if they are injured or killed as a result of performing their duties. The benefit itself is not expensive when you consider the value that it brings to our employees and their dependents. It's $48.60 per year per insured member, and that includes their spouse and eligible dependent children. And the rate that's in effect right now is in place until the end of 2022.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from anyone? Councilor Desai.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Warden Hicks. I just wanted to express gratitude to staff for bringing forward this report. I know this was a result from a notice of motion that I presented a short while ago. So thank you for the quick turnaround to the CAO and to staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see any other hands up. So with that said, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion before us? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you, Sandra. Okay, item 7D. We're dealing with provincial funding for childcare. I need a mover, please, to put it on the floor. Councillor Desai moves, seconded by Councillor Clumpus. Tara? You'll need to push your green button.
There we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, County Council. Our report today is to ensure Council is aware of some funding pressures that we are looking at for the Children's Services Department for 2022 and to seek some Council direction. In 2019, the Ministry of Education announced changes to the early learning and childcare funding to be phased in over 3 years. In 2020, there was a cost share requirement implemented of an 80-20 for our expansion funding that was voluntary. In phase 2 for 2021, the cost share requirement was still voluntary, and there was a new cost share requirement of 50-50 for our 10% admin allocation for expansion, wage enhancement, and our licensed home child care funding. During that time, the province then announced a one-time transitional funding allocation to offset this cost share requirement, so there was no levy impact. As we enter into phase 3, the 80-20 cost share requirement for expansion is no longer a voluntary contribution, meaning that for every dollar spent, 20 cents would be levy funding. There's also an additional reduction of our admin allocation from 10% to 5%, which is also cost shared. I'd like you to note that our currently CMSMs have not yet received confirmation of the 2022 funding allocations. So the table on page 4 is based on our 2021 allocation, and we will provide an update when we receive further information. In 2013, the county received one-time mitigation funding to support the transition to a new funding formula, and those funds are currently being held in reserve. They can be used for eligible expenses over and above our allocation, but at this point, it cannot be used to offset levy cost share requirements. We are seeking council direction to request permission from EDU to use mitigation reserve to offset this municipal cost in hopes of reducing our levy impact in the 2022 budget. An additional funding pressure is within the early on budgets. In 2017, a variety of capital early on bills were approved for school-based projects. These are in various stages of completion throughout the county. There has not been a significant increase to early on budget since 2018, and this is resulting in some funding pressures related to higher rents from these larger spaces in the schools. The Hanover Early On Center is also originally a purpose-built as a childcare center in a residential area. As the building ages, it is not cost effective to operate and would need a lift installed by 2025 to meet accessibility requirements. A pre-existing agreement with the province states that the proceeds of the sale of the building in Hanover would revert to the province. Taking into consideration the significant financial investment the county has made into the building over the years, staff are seeking council direction to request an agreement from EDU that the building be sold and the proceeds would be reinvested into a new, more efficient early on location. take any questions.
Thank you very much, Tara. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, then I will call the question on the motion to receive, to request approval from the Ministry of Education with respect to those mitigation funds, and to request that letter of approval with respect to the sale of the early on facility in Hanover. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Tara. We're on to item 7E. Mary Lou, and oh, you're on deck, okay. Is Anne Marie joining in on this? No, I see a head shaking no. So we're dealing with the Golden Town mortgage. I need a mover to put it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Milne, seconded by Councillor Desai. Mary Lou, you have the floor.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'd like to call this one a good news story. We have the mortgage for Golden Town, which is one of the two mortgages that we assumed when we took over the nonprofit in the fall of 2018. The first mortgage with CMHC is paid off. This last one renews on December 1st and has just over $2 million remaining on the mortgage, and it was scheduled for 59 months. Because it was with the province went out for competitive rates. People's Trust expressed an interest in the mortgage at 3.8%. And staff have examined a few options. So the first would be to renew the mortgage with an external lender. And the rate on November 2nd with Infrastructure Ontario was 1.97%. The existing mortgage has a 1.995 interest rate, so the payments would be very similar. We could self-finance it as we've done with several of our debts, including the addition to this building. And we could repay with an interest rate equivalent to the posted Infrastructure Ontario rate when we have to make payment to Bank of Nova Scotia. This would result in a similar budget repayment obligation and provide investment income that would be maybe 0.25% higher than what we could get on the posted 5-year rate. The third option, which we're recommending, is we pay off the mortgage and we don't repay ourselves the interest. Instead, the proposed 2022 housing budget could be reduced by the amount that's in the 2021 budget, which is just under $435,000. And over 59 months at 1.97% interest, that would decrease the investment income by just over $103,000, but it would provide a means of assisting in reducing the 2022 budget. And just in comparison, a 1% tax increase in 2021 is just over $610,500. So if you compare the $434,600 with the 2021 amount, that's a 0.7% reduction.
Great, thank you very much, Mary Lou. And I would note that Anne Marie is online if anyone has questions of her as well. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Sampson.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'm just wondering, I think the consensus these days is that rates are going up and not down. In fact, I keep hearing economists from the relative banks saying that we better see that, or I guess they'll go bankrupt. I'm not too sure what that message is, but sense is though that the rates are going up. I'm just wondering whether it would be wise then to lock in at a long-term rate now, since when it's expecting yield curves to actually go back to normal profiles, they're pretty flat right now. Whether it would be wise to keep borrowing at the long-term rate and then reinvesting that cash at a much higher rate over the next cycle. Rate increases I'm hearing are coming early next year or mid next year. That's i.e. in the Bank of Canada rate increases, et cetera. Just wonder if you can comment on that.
Through you, Mr. Warden. That's a great question. They've been predicting interest rate increases for quite some time. Every time we turn around, they say, oh, in 6 months it's going up. And I'm hearing the same, that, potentially we could hear of increases mid next year. We certainly could take that approach. What it would result in is we would have an interest expense in the housing budget, and we would be looking at that $435,000 being part of the housing budget for 2022. So it's a question of whether you want us to go out and we can self-finance, even borrow from ourselves, pay ourselves back, or use this money to reduce the budget for 2022.
Thank you, Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. I can appreciate that we're trying to reduce the budget next year by 0.7%. My question is, would it not be more prudent to discharge the mortgage, and instead of reducing the budget by $434,600, would it not be prudent to move this money into a reserve, similar to what the county did with Lee Manor when Lee Manor was redeveloped and the loan on that was paid off? There was a transfer made to reserve that was equivalent to the amount that was going towards the principal and the interest payments, if I recall correctly. Would that not be more prudent in the long run? Thank you.
You're correct. When the Lee Manor debenture was paid off, we transferred $1,361,000 annually to reserve. We are, as part of the proposed 2022 budget, looking at a 1.2 transfer to reserve for asset management purposes. So that's primarily in the transportation budget. We certainly can include that in the budget. What I will say is right now we have a number of budgetary pressures that I will say it will be a larger increase than probably I can recall. So it depends if you want to do that now or you want to do that later. Certainly at some point we will need funds for housing. We do have the 1% that we have to find in the 2022 budget that currently is funded from the one-time funding reserve in 2021.
Thank you, Warden Hicks. Thank you, Mayor Lou, for that. Is the budget this year not 1% higher than what it should normally be? Because last year, County Council voted to reduce the levy by 1% by taking money from reserves to fund operations. So realistically, and I'm using this number as an example, if the budget was coming back to us at 5%, is the true cost not 4% because of that decision that was made last year? And so should we be allowing that decision to affect our decision today? Because we knew last year that we were going to be looking at a 1% budget increase without doing anything. So should we really be letting that affect our decision? And more importantly, should we be letting short-term thinking affect long-term decisions? I want to clarify, that's not a question for Mary Lou. That is an unfair question to ask Mary Lou. That is a question for council as in general. And yeah, sorry.
And I don't see anyone with their hand up to answer, Councillor Desai. So with that said, are there any other comments to be made? Councillor Desai?
Thank you, Warden Hicks. I will make an amendment that that as a result of the mortgage being discharged and no expense required for principal and interest repayment, that the proposed, instead of the proposed net levy being reduced, that the $434,600 be added as an addition to what we're already moving to the affordable housing reserve.
My apologies, Rob. Thank you for that reminder. So it was, the motion was not supported. It was not seconded, so it failed. And we're now voting on the main motion. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And is it a fair statement to say that regardless of what we decide here today, when we get to the budget discussions, we could still do a couple options, one being what Mr. Desai is suggesting. The other is exactly what is in the recommendation here today.
Through you, Mr. Warden. You will see a report on the December 9th committee about where we're looking at for the proposed 2022 budget. At that time, if you wish, we could adjust the budget before it is presented to you on January 28th.
Thank you very much. I think we're ready to call, Councillor Sampson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Warden. I'm just a bit worried that this is using capital to fund an operating expense. And that's sort of the golden rule one should never trip across. We're using cash and investment to basically lower an operating cost expense. And as I said, I think from a funding perspective, it's probably not the wisest to do. So just wondering whether you would have a comment on whether we've done that in the past before and why would we do it in this particular case?
Through you, Mr. Warden. It does depend on the budget. I will say that these are in the operating budget, the principal and interest repayments on all the housing debt. Not that it really matters whether it's in one budget or another, because it's in the combined budget. I can look at it a number of different ways. Probably in a less pressured budget, we would look at transferring this to reserve for future use. I think housing probably has enough projects on their capital budget to do in 2022 that they couldn't add more projects for their own buildings simply because of COVID. And they've had you couldn't do work internally in buildings. So they are behind, and there's some projects they didn't award because prices came in less than desirable.
Madam CAO. Sorry about that, Mary Lou, I cut you off. Madam CAO.
Thank you. Mary Lou, just to confirm to council, when do we have to confirm with the bank?
We have to provide payment on this loan by December 1st. So whether at any rate, we have to either self-finance and cut a check or borrow from somewhere else.
Thank you. I'd also say that to revisit this decision today, these minutes will go to November 25th. If we wanted to have a discussion about this matter again on December 9th, we would be doing that as a part of a reconsideration motion, I believe.
Okay, you're good, Councillor Sampson. Councillor Milne.
To be clear, Mr. Warden, I'm supportive of paying the discharging the mortgage. I'm just saying that what we decide ultimately to do with that payment space can be decided when we debate the budget.
Thank you, point noted. Okay, I think we're ready to call the question. Councillor Desai.
Thank you. Point of clarity then on what the CAO and Councillor Milne had just said. Would it be more prudent to remove that last bit in that second clause regarding the effect on the proposed net levy altogether, so that it leaves our options open for December 9th when we do get to it, instead of having it be a reconsideration?
Mary Lou?
For sure, we could do that as part of just remove that portion of the motion. Basically, what we need at this point is we need to pay Bank of Nova Scotia just over $2 million. And if you'd like to look at what room there is in the draft budget when you see December 9th, we can certainly do that.
My apologies, I should turn on my sound. That would be an amendment. Are you moving that amendment, Councillor Desai? Okay, and it's seconded by the Deputy Warden. Any discussion on the amendment? Then I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. And all those opposed to the amendment? The amendment is carried. So now we will vote on the amended motion. Any discussion before I call that question? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor McQueen.
I think just for clarity and for the viewing public, it doesn't mean it can't go there. We're just putting it on pause for now. Is that clear?
Thank you, sir. Any other comments before we vote? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And those opposed? It is carried. Sorry, thank you, Mary Lou. Anne Marie is on deck. We're going to be dealing with item 7F, the purchase of a building for transitional and supportive housing in Owen Sound. I need a mover to put this item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Keaveney, seconded by Councillor Carlton, and I got it right this time. Okay. Anne Marie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This report in front of you is looking to purchase a building in order to enable the county to renovate the building for much needed supportive housing. We know by our by names list that we have about 36 people experiencing chronic homelessness in the area. And we are expecting more after our enumeration, more information on numbers and need. We also have community partners such as Grey Roof House Services and the Canadian Mental Health Association that have people on their waiting list in need of supportive housing. This would allow us to have a partnership in which the county provides the bricks and mortar and the ongoing maintenance and the ongoing property management. And then we would have our community partners provide supportive services for people that are living there so that there is supports and housing all in one place. It would also allow us to have a hub for people that would be in need of obtaining services, and also some office for staff. And depending on the needs would depend on what type of staffing is available. So we did identify some lands at 396 14th Street West in Owen Sound that we thought would be a suitable candidate. We hired Salter Pilon Consulting in order to do a site analysis. It is an ideal location as it is close to Salvation Army and other Grey County buildings. At the Affordable Housing Task Force on October 26th, staff were directed to negotiate a conditional purchase of the building. And we were successful in negotiating a conditional agreement of purchase and sale. The agreement is conditional on satisfactory site and environmental investigations and obviously county approval. We are looking at having JM plan complete the phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessment, as well and also the necessary record of site condition. We've already been working with the Owen Sound Planning Department, and if all of the conditions are satisfied, then we would obtain title to the property on January 20th. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Anne Marie. Are there questions from council? I have to say, I'm really excited to see this one come to fruition. Okay, I think we're ready to call the question then. All those in favor of the motion as presented? Is there anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Anne Marie. Okay, so we're, one second. Thank you very much. Councillor Soever did pull item 6A. So we'll go back to that, capital purchase prior to budget approval. Councillor Soever, do you mind moving it just to put it on the floor?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you. I'm now looking for a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Robinson. Councillor Soever, you have the floor. You need to press your green button.
Yes, this capital purchase report refers to a number of projects, including the construction on 2 Gray Road 13 pulverized and paved projects. And I see we're approving them going out to tender. I'm just wanting to make sure that the tenders include the paved shoulders. Those roads are part of the cycling and trails master plan. And we've actually had people express concerns that there's quite heavy use of those roads for bicycle traffic and transportation, particularly during apple picking season, when we have a lot of foreign workers here, and a lot of them use bicycles as their main source of transport to come into town. And so our paved shoulders are typically pretty narrow, and Bill Abbott's, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, he's been very involved in the bicycling, both with the county staff and our staff, and I think with Meaford staff as well. He's and they've used road counters and things like that put out on the road. So he suggested that when we tender these things, we consider even wider paved shoulders than is typical. Up to 2.5 meters. A lot of that road has the platform that would support a wider one. I don't know if it will support 2.5 meters, but it is a fairly flat area with on a river sand plain. So it's not a challenging area in terms of platform width. So I just wanted to ask staff, these pulverized and paved projects, as we're going out to tender rather quickly, is there consideration of the paved shoulders and how wide they'll be? And I saw that this report was prepared in consultation with finance staff, but not the manager of tourism. So I just wanted to make sure that the paved shoulders were considered.
Thank you. I see that Pat's on the line. Pat?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Yes, all these projects on this list have paved shoulders, with the exception of the Gray Road 8 overlay. It wasn't identified as a route on the Cycling and Trails Master Plan. So that being said, I believe we are anticipating a 1.5 meter shoulder, or possibly 1.25. I haven't actually seen the design drawings on these yet, but I will go back to our staff and see. As per Book 18, like a 1.5 meter paved shoulder is kind of the recommended width. We try to reach 1.5 when we can. Again, with a few exceptions, some of the bigger projects in the next few years, we're going to start widening out some platforms, but there aren't many roads in our system that we could have a 2.5 meter paved shoulder on. Gray Road 4 and the Grey Boost line would be another one maybe, but general, and a couple spots on 2 actually, for that matter. Some strange ones there. It's wider than other areas, but typically we try to gun for 1.5 meters. So that was kind of what we're anticipating, but I'll go back to our design staff and see how much room we have to go wider there.
Thank you. Councillor Soever, anything else? Okay, thank you. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So am I to understand that we do not pave shoulders unless it's identified on the cycling master plan?
Yes, through you, Mr. Warden. Yeah, generally that was kind of our goal, like transportation's biggest goal when we were doing the cycling and trails, that there's just some roads, whether it's because of a lack of traffic in general or a lack of platform. There are a few, not very many, but there are a few that were identified as not a signed route or not a cycling route. And those, we may possibly put a partially paved shoulder due to some, trucks and the granular shoulder drop off, just to kind of make the road just slightly wider. But Grey Road 8, for example, is not on our list of paved shoulders that we were going to do.
Well, I guess what I would suggest is that I would like to see, if not the 1.5 meters, at least something on the shoulder of Grey Road 8, because we do have an increasing population of the horse and buggy community who use bicycles a lot, and they're expanding throughout the township of Southgate, if not the rest of the county. And I think there'd be a very good case to be made from a safety standpoint to have some widening of the paved shoulder on Grey Road 8. So I wonder if you'd have another look at that, Pat, and consider that, please.
Yes, we can do that. Yeah, we'll have another look at it.
Councillor Sampson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Warden. I know if the colleague I'm representing here today were here today, he would ask this question. So do we have a dig once policy? And if so, are we considering the laying of internet capacity conduit in these areas? Because these areas are typically, if you take a look at the map, areas where there's an internet deficiency, to the point that some of them don't have anything. So it seems to me if I don't know whether the county does or does not have a dig once policy, but if we did, we should very seriously consider, to the extent we are digging up the roads to do any work, that we, or even on the side and the shoulders, we look at least laying conduit that would allow subsequent operators to come in and lay wire, so that the people who live along these roads can have the benefit of what a lot of us have, which is access to at least some internet capacity. So I'm just asking the question about whether or not we have a dig once policy here.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. We talked about this a few years ago, when Swift was getting started, and what was something we could do to prepare for the future. Generally, with those long rural runs, we don't really want anything under the road anyway. We kind of like it maybe a meter off the property line in the ditch, or on the backside of the slope kind of thing. And so it was one of those situations where it just wasn't economically feasible for us to do that, because we're not, fiber designers, for one. And it's just as easy for them to do it in the future. There's really nothing to be gained there, rurally, especially. Now, the one thing I will add is there has been a few urban jobs we've done since, like Dundalk, for example, where we have put some conduit at intersections, et cetera, where we think it's going to run in the future. Again, not being designers and not being in charge of where fiber is running, it's hoped that investment isn't a waste of time. But that is what we've been doing in some of the urbans. But rural, it's just as easy for someone to come in later and do it.
Thank you, Madam CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And just to add to Pat's comments, at the time that we were part of the Intelligent Communities work, some of the background work that went into that, there was some extensive surveying done of the internet service providers, et cetera. They themselves at that time were not in favor of that. They each had their own particular requirements, and it became clear that what we might do might suit one but not another. We do have examples from other jurisdictions where they have made the investment to put it in place, and it has not been used.
Thank you. Deputy Warden McQueen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden and County Council. And going back to Councilor Millen, I certainly support his endeavors to, not endeavors, but in the sense of looking at paved shoulders on Gray Road 8. I would say that Gray Road 31, I think, was one of the first roads that had a paved shoulder on it. And viewing that road, and I see it's on for a lift here. I will say that, yes, it supports the cycling group, which I saw, and I see a lot on that road. But it also supports, I see people walking and local people using that. But more importantly, I don't see the deterioration of the shoulder of the road because it carries that out. It keeps that salt, that wet, whatever you call those mild spells that deteriorates the edge of that road. And also, I think you save on roadside grate. You know how you do the shoulder with the grading because you do that tar, you seal that, so you save there. So certainly, I'm a big believer of moving forward on all our roads on that. And I just think that there's so many benefits of doing that it just seems to be the right thing to do. And I thought we did have a direction that we all knew construct roads that we were doing paved shoulders, but maybe we need to look at that policy. And I know there's certain roads maybe you're limited, but I see so many benefits just from that first road being done. So I certainly support us looking at County Road 8 and all the other roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I think, Pat, you want to add
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Yeah, we'll go back and look at that again. And I think it kind of be a benefit to all councillors to have a look at the roads where we have paved the shoulder. And we had written it in our original report that, it decreases the cracking if the cracking starts at the outside edge and kind of migrates into the lane. But it actually, if you look at some of the roads where we've paved the shoulder, the lack of cracking is really almost shocking how well that white line holds up. So it's hard for us to quantify exactly how much longer these, roads are going to last than if we didn't do it. But there's definitely some cost savings there in between the granular shouldering and the manpower and the fuel. And so, yeah, we should look at the Gray Road 8 again and have another look at that.
Deputy Warden?
Just to follow up, this morning on the way up here just today, coming up Gray Road 13 and 7, I was on 7 and there was a work van in front of me and we met some vehicles and all of a sudden everything slowed down and there was an individual that was cycling on the road, but that person, because it's not a paved shoulder area, it slowed down the traffic. Had there been a paved shoulder, I think there's a lot of safety issues around that as well, that there's a place for that individual to be. Because this person was cycling a little bit up on an incline and it's hard enough to cycle on an incline, but being in a graveled area and stuff like that. So I see so many safety parts of that as well.
Thank you for that. Before I go to you, Councillor Silver, Councillor Sampson, did I cut you off by chance? No, I didn't. Okay, Councillor Silver.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. So I'm hearing from staff that there's no benefit to putting the conduit in, and yet the region of Durham seems to have found out that their dig once policy will reduce the cost of broadband deployment. And they're talking here that they can account that the cost of digging up and restoring municipal rights of way can account for 60 to 80% of the overall cost. Well, and they have implemented a dig once policy, and then on a case-by-case basis, the region of Durham evaluates where future fiber optic may be needed and then places the conduit during road construction and reconstruction. And, the conduit is reserved for future use. We've consulted with our Rabbit Task Force with a number of people who build networks and service providers, and a properly laid and constructed conduit is fairly cheap, because the big cost, as it points out here, 60 to 80% of the cost is the digging and repairing. And so I don't know. My question to staff is, what does the region of Durham know that we don't know?
Madam CAO? I think you're muted.
I apologize. Certainly, if it's council's wish, we can look into this further. I don't know that the conditions in Grey County are a mirror of what might be occurring in Durham with regard to population density and the rural nature of our roads. The fact that there are a number of funding programs taking place right now and multiple service providers moving into that space. I think that also has an impact. As I say, the information that we were using is a few years old now. And so if there's if council feels it's advisable, we can certainly take another look. We also know that given the nature of Grey County, it's not always easy digging, and there's a lot of fiber that's on poles because it can't be buried. So I'm totally open to direction from the council this afternoon, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CAO. We may also, I know I'm speaking out of turn and I apologize, but we may want to wait and fully see what the province's plan is, because there's a pretty big broadband expansion project on the go or in the works right now by the province. So that is a factor we should probably consider as well. Are there other comments to be made? Deputy Warden?
So just for clarity to the members of the mountains or who's raising this, are we talking about just putting a conduit in that you blow the wire in later? Is that what your idea is? It's just sort of you put the plastic piping in, I don't know what size that looks like or whatever. I guess you could get a cost per meter or whatever, or maybe there is a costing on that. I don't know. And you could come back to county council on that and even try it in a certain section of road that you think it's going to be a probability. I don't know.
Huh?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's kind of a standalone thing. Like in a rural, like I said, the information at the time, we don't know how to design fiber networks. And it really, since it's not in the road, like in the urban, I can sort of see it because, you've kind of got the road dug up for water main and sanitary, et cetera. But in a rural, you're not even working in the same area. You're out near the fence line somewhere, typically is where we allow them to put fiber. So it's hard to just envision any economy of scale in doing that at the same time. Yeah, so I mean, we can go back, as Kim said, to the if the committee wishes and see what the fiber providers say now. But at the time, it was just kind of us doing work that we have never done. And, worst case scenario, you put all this fiber in and nobody ever uses any of it. I don't know. And that's hard to kind of justify too. So, but whatever the committee would prefer.
Thank you, sir. Anything further, Deputy Warden? Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to say it's time to call the question. All those in favor of the motion before you? And all those opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. We are now going to go to item number 8, which is a closed meeting matter. And we're going to be proposing to meet in closed session to deal with the security of the property pursuant to section 2392 of the Municipal Act. I need a mover. This into closed session, moved by Councillor Milne, seconded by Councillor Patterson. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. So we'll take a short break. I'm going to suggest maybe 5 minutes. So come back at 20 minutes past. Yeah. We shouldn't, oh my goodness. Okay, we should not take a break, I'm being told. I should have done that before. My apology. So we are